Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to friends who are joining us from Paris, France, Europe, and other parts of the world. Welcome to our event today on sustainable finance and AI, brought to you by SGInnovate and the French Chamber of Commerce. My name is Tuan from SGInnovate. We are a Singapore government-owned organization that builds deep tech innovations in AI, medtech, quantum tech, autonomous technologies. We invest in deep tech startups across industries, financial services, healthcare, urban mobility. We also work with scientists and clinicians who are looking to commercialize their research. We build deep tech talent and engage with the deep tech innovation ecosystem and marketplace through events like this. Together with the French Chamber of Commerce, we have a very big shared interest area, and that is to bring together startups, corporates, to connect and collaborate in an enabling policy environment. And that is why we are very happy to have with us today representatives from the startup, corporate, government, and international development organizations to discuss a very important topic of our time on sustainable finance. And with that, I would now like to invite our friend and partner at the French Chamber of Commerce, Lydia, to also say a few words before we get things started. Lydia, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tuan, and good day, everyone. My name is Lydia Fulton, and I'm in charge of the committees, events, and communication at the French Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. Part of our mission is to accelerate the development of French companies in the local market, and also to develop relations between our members and the Singapore business community. On behalf of the French Chamber of Commerce, I'm thrilled to co-host and partner with SGInnovate this webinar today. As Tuan just mentioned, through our partnership, we are spearheading to foster the collaboration between startups and corporates. And we are looking forward to bringing more webinars and events between SGInnovate and the French Chamber to this end. Today's topic, sustainable finance and AI, is clearly part and relevant to the French Chamber's sustainability journey and all the initiatives we have been launching so far for more sustainable business. Also, and finally, I would like to thank all our great speakers today for their insights and sharings. Thank you very much. Annabelle, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Lydia from the French Chamber of Commerce, and of course, my wonderful teammate, Tuan, behind all the events at SGInnovate. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome. Whether you are in Singapore or watching from overseas, we are glad to have all of you here with us for our online panel discussion, Sustainable Finance and AI. We'll begin with a quick round of introductions. Panelists, please share what you do briefly, and maybe we can start off with Sop Nandu from BMAS.
Hey, I thought I'll be the last one. Anyway, I'm the Chief FinTech Officer of MAS. I look after use of technology to make financial sector much more better, inclusive, green, sustainable, everything we talk good. So that's my job.
Thank you, Sop Nandu. And maybe we can have Sherwin from the ADB go next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sherwin Pu, and I'm heading the business development in ADB's private sector operations. In my team, there is one function which is very closely related to today's topic. Actually, I'm looking after ADB Ventures, which is ADB's venture platform to support the technology startups in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherwin. And next we can have Hardesh.
Hi, everyone. This is Hardesh. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Radical Eye. We are a RegTech firm, and we've built an AI assistant to help compliance teams in financial services to track regulations of different jurisdictions, understand how that impacts their business, and also give them the tools to monitor and manage their compliance risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Hardesh. And last but not least, we have Tanguy all the way in Paris.
Good afternoon to all. My name is Tanguy Claquin. I'm in Paris. I am with the Crédit Agricole CIB, investment bank of Crédit Agricole. I am in charge of sustainable finance globally for the bank, so pushing all product with a strong social or environmental component throughout the investment bank. And I'm also a member of the ExCom of the Green Bond Principle. I'm actually the co-chair of the Green Bond Principle, so that's something that we could discuss together also.
Thank you, Tanguy, and thank you very much all the rest of the panelists for your introduction. My name is Annabelle. I lead the development team at SGInnovate, and I work together with our founders to help them to grow their companies and increase their chances of success. So a couple of just admin matters over here. I will ask a few opening questions and leave time for all of you to participate through the Q&A function on Zoom. At any point in time, you can type your questions and we'll get to them. And we hope to have all of you engage in conversation and participate and make the most of this session. So to begin, I think this is a topic that a lot of us is faced with right now. And over the past few months, with countries in lockdown and large parts of the economy shut, a bright spark amidst the economic gloom was a significant reduction of air pollution and emissions of greenhouse gases. So the COVID-19 pandemic has been a catalyst for a breakthrough in the environment. And along with that, the pandemic has also many social and governance implications. I'm excited to explore the topic of sustainable finance and AI, especially with the current state of the world, with environmental, social, and governance factors brought to the fore in business decisions. So to kick us off, panelists, how has the sustainable finance industry been impacted as a result of COVID-19?
You want us to...
Could I start?
Yes, and anyone.
Okay, there's a
Free
pause.
flow.
So let's our guest from Paris start, because he's in the farthest from us.
Okay, I can have a quick start on this one. Initially, when the COVID crisis didn't start at the same moment everywhere, of course, and so the impact has been at different moments in different places. What has been clear, in fact, is that if I look at it from a Paris standpoint or for a European standpoint, when the lockdown started here, so beginning of March, depending on the countries, in the first days, there was a bit a stop in sustainable finance. People thinking about how to manage their individual life in the lockdown period and trying to concentrate on vital things. But very rapidly, the market.
Okay, I can step in as he's dealing with. Yes, okay. Yeah. So let's step in?
Yes, please.
Okay, yes. Good. Okay, so I'm used to it. So let me add what Tanguy is. Oh, he's back. Okay. Tanguy, you're back.
We lost you for a bit. If you could repeat maybe 2 sentences back.
Okay, so I was saying that initially the market has stopped. Let me move. See if I get a better connection here. The market has stopped. When the market reopened, I've seen a transaction that linked to COVID. And in fact, initially, those markets were... Can you hear me? I'm sorry, it seems to be...
Yeah, we can hear you now. So the market seems to have stopped. Initially, it stopped, but then...
Yeah, initially the market has stopped, but very rapidly the market has reopened, and I would say that sustainable finance was then clearly at the core of the market. Initially with social topics, and we have seen a number of social bond and social related transactions, but now we see that also in the recovery plan, most of the recovery plan are integrating also some environmental considerations. So I would say that sustainable finance is even more than that before the crisis at the core of any discussion in the financial industry, and so that in fact sustainable finance has been then pushed at the forefront of the agenda by the crisis. So I would say that initially it has been a bit a period of stopping, but now in terms of the importance of sustainable finance has grown due to the crisis very significantly, in not only in sustainable finance market, but also if you read the press, in any discussion that is taking place in the policymaker agenda, for instance, we see that there are questions related to the fact that the recovery plan would take into account social and environmental consideration.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tanguy. And I think Sopnandu, you wanted to also share some of your thoughts on this. And maybe if you could also share whether you see the same situation or the same thing taking place in Singapore, around the region in Southeast Asia.
Sure. Yes, I think very similar view. I would use this phrase that during COVID-19, I think people have almost been forced to accept the principles behind sustainability, green, and the social aspect of everything we do, which is a great thing because we are naturally getting there, which would have been a tough call through education and other enlightenment process. So definitely, I think this is a time where this particular subject will take a lot of precedence in terms of where we should focus. And I was telling before this call, you look at last 2 months, the number of bonds issued directed to sustainable finance, from $8 billion World Bank Fund to $1 billion from IFC and the European Development Bank. You see a whole suite of sustainable social bond coming out of the market, because what comes, and that's what Hardis was talking, that what is really going to be a big challenge as we get out of COVID-19, and large part of the focus will be recovery. And the recovery will be 3 areas: health, the way we do our business, the whole construct is shifting from where we work, how we transportation, logistic, the whole package will take a shift. And again, all of us will be back to a very socially conscious way we think about finance. And I'll give you an example. In India, there was a massive migration during COVID-19 from the urban centers to the rural center. And almost, if you read the read newspaper, there's a distress, there's a lot of challenges where these people are moving. One thing could have saved a lot of these people was focus on pension systems. Because if you had saved money for last 10, 20 years in working in the urban center, you would have managed to stay back in the urban cities at least for a month using your pension savings. Because pension is a big social crisis, and you can see it's coming out of very strongly during this COVID-19. So examples like that will drive a lot of the thinking around sustainability finance, and it will drive a lot of this focus around how do we make our earth a sustainable place to stay. And that's in the long term. But short term, mid term, focus on health, recovery of the economy, get into new normal of where we work and where we conduct ourselves, and big focus in that space. So I'm quite looking forward to this space, both as a technologist and as a firm believer of this space and how we should think about financing the new world.
Thank you, Sopnandu. And Sherwin, over in the ADB, what do you see as the impact to the industry?
Yeah, actually, I agree with other panelists. And to a certain extent, I think this pandemic is a wake-up call to the global citizens that actually the global crisis could be very, very close to us. In the past, when we talk about, for example, climate change, when we even talk about the health threat, people always believe that, no, actually, it's not going to happen, or it's so remote. But suddenly, after this pandemic, people realize that actually it could be just overnight, and the world may change entirely. So I would say that, the slowdown of sustainable finance because of the pandemic is just temporary. And post-COVID, I would say that people probably will focus more on sustainable finance, and probably, there will be a lot of, new money or new projects or probably new initiatives will start from all the angles, not only like about health, but could be about address climate change, could address gender equality, and all these kind of new initiatives. I would say that will have a lot of potentials post COVID-19. From ADB perspective, we always support sustainable finance. Actually, if you look at what we are doing, actually the entire ADB portfolio probably can be considered sustainable finance. But on the other side, we see that it will become a trend in the future that more commercial institutions and more countries will join the force, try to push the sustainable finance.
Thank you, Sherwin, for your input. And I think it's very much what has been resonating among all the panelists is there might be a pause right now, but in future or in the days to come, we see more of the issuances for sustainable finance, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's very, very encouraging to hear. We are actually also beginning to see some questions, but I will let that go on and continue for a bit. Maybe we can briefly share about your organization's sustainable finance or ESG activities and what has been the challenges for all these activities.
Sure.
Starting from Paris again.
I will start. I mean, the first challenge was not on sustainable finance. The first challenge was, and I think it was the same for all of you. I mean, the first challenge for us that from one day to the next, we had to work from home and to have a bank working fully from home. And so that was a big challenge. And I think the first surprise after a few days is that actually it was working quite well and we were able to do that. And so in fact, it is a challenge and it is an opportunity. It is an opportunity to demonstrate that the economy to some extent can work with this type of system. Of course, this applies to a bank. It doesn't apply to the full economy. So the first challenge or the first surprise afterwards is also the concentration that we have observed on key sector. And I think this crisis is also for sustainable finance or for economy as a whole to see what are the macro sectors and how the macro sectors are linked to each other, and how when we do analyze what are key sustainability trends, we need to bundle those sectors together. I'll take an example. Clearly, there is now a big crisis hitting the transportation sector. And so that's certainly something that for which we will see a recovery, and we will and hopefully those sectors will come back to a normal flow activity. But it's also clear that we have all get used to new ways of meeting or doing business together with this type of tool that we are using today. And there is a clear link between the IT and telecom sector and transportation. And when we analyze this vital need that we have for business and for any human interaction to meet each other, to travel, to have interaction all together, there is clearly an interlink in the sector analysis between telecom and transportation. And so when we do the sustainability analysis of the vital sector we are facing, clearly, I think there is a bit of a sectorial reshuffling in the way we see things. That's clearly also the thing in the transportation.
Okay. Would any of the other panelists have thoughts about the challenges of integrating sustainable finance and AI?
I just want to make a broad comment here. I think one thing, it sounds that we are all a bit optimistic. I think it's worth remembering that we don't know when the post-COVID world will announce itself. Talks of a vaccine at the earliest stage, we'll probably only get our hands, that is at the most optimistic level is that by the end of the year, right? So that's talking about another 6 to 7 months of continued disruption to various industries. Now, what does that mean, right? So we've only seen 2 months or 3 months of this impact, right? Of course, environmentally, we've seen great benefits, and that's also an indication of how directly we are impacting the environment. But the broader question that we have to sort of ask is, what is the next 6-7 months of this existing situation continuing going to result in? And how does that translate into people and businesses, balancing these competing priorities, right? Between fighting for survival, right, and doing what's responsible or ethical, right? When you're faced with these two challenging and some would say competing interests, like, you're definitely gonna, focus more on surviving before you think about doing the right thing, right? So I think that's something that's, we should really be diving into at this point, right?
So I think your question is how easy to integrate AI and sustainability finance. That's the question, right, Annabella?
It's the challenges of integrating sustainable finance.
So I think my fundamental or little provocative line here would be the data itself, because there are very fundamental construct before AI can work: taxonomy, guidelines, and the source of data. You got to get that absolutely clear as much as possible. And let me briefly on each of the line. I think the taxonomy, a lot of effort is going around. I can see many countries have started defining some kind of taxonomy around green, but that's still a lot of greenwashing going around. So trying to put everything as green. So you want to get that thing right first. I think quicker we get there, better for the industry to use AI more thoughtfully. On the data side, I'll be a little more provocative here, because a lot of data is still dependent on certain called public source or a government source or reported source. But we have seen in crisis that data doesn't really come out in a trusted way. And good examples across the world, whenever there's an environmental disaster, data seems to get diluted, especially from where the data is coming. Now, how can we shift data dependent from public sources to citizen-centric data sources, which means me as an individual affected by this crisis should be able to transmit data from a little device from my pocket to cloud. And that data has got nothing to do with who is telling me how to send data. I'm just computing, collecting data and sending to the cloud. If you can think about empowering citizens who can capture the data, transmit to an open source, open citizen-centric data, I think large part of the data problem can be solved. I really doubt that we can create an infrastructure or an institution which will create data and pass. I think that's something we have to work on. And lastly, on the issue around how far we can get in terms of understanding how to apply the guidelines, because guidelines are still evolving. There are still complex legal processes to look at, and also there are a lot of trade-offs, because sometimes green can lead to an interim economic loss for many countries. So there are these complex politics of the guidelines, how it affects the local economy. So you have to get all these three strands clarified, but it's an evolving process. But I think we are directionally moving the right way, but I think we're still a long way to go.
Thank you, Sopnamdu. And I think you mentioned a very interesting point on data, as well as moving it increasingly from public sources to citizen-centric sources, and the taxonomy, or what is actually green. At this point, maybe we can also jump in to answer one of the questions from the audience, from Priya Bellino. Do you believe consistency and availability of reliable ESG data is going to hinder the use of AI development in a meaningful way? And what work is there going on to address that in the region? So maybe if the panelists can share what work they've been seeing about the consistency, the availability of data, and how is this issue or problem being addressed?
While I have my thoughtful panelists respond to that, I will strongly recommend all the listener today to go to a website called Safecast, SAFECAST. It's a public organized, is a citizen-centric non-profit organization empowering citizens to capture data around radiation that runs out of Japan post Fukushima crisis. you all must see how that data has been collected. It's a fascinating example of how to collect data and trust the source. Okay, I'll let my other panelists reflect on it, but that's a great example to think about data.
Thank you.
If I may, Annabelle, answer this question from Priya, and thanks for Somnendu for referring the question to us. So the question is about believing whether consistency and availability of reliable ESG data is going to hinder the use of AI development. I think Somnendu has mentioned that point earlier, right? Like, look, the biggest problem here is, how do you get the structured data in a meaningful way? Now, when it comes to ESG reporting, for example, you're relying on multiple reporting frameworks. It's still largely, up to the discretion of firms to decide what information they want to report, what they consider material. So gathering that data, firstly, it's a challenge already, right? Before you can even start talking about, how you're going to apply AI to derive meaningful insights, first you have to solve that challenge. How are firms actually gathering this data today, right?
That's right. Chauvin or Tanguy, any thoughts about?
Yeah, I just want to add a minor point here, and it's true that in terms of the data for ESGs, I would say that currently most of those data are not organized. So if you want to use it, it's very difficult. But at the same time, we have seen some strong efforts in the market, people trying to, create a system, get this kind of data organized. From my personal view is that, okay, this step probably should start a long time ago. But let's say that now it's still not too late. I would say that when the people start to move towards that direction, hopefully, in the foreseeable future, we will have some tools become available and to reduce the heavy labor required to get this kind of ESGs to sort out at this moment. And then when you can see that the whole process will be accelerated. When you start to have people get this kind of data sorted out, then naturally will some people to develop the tools how to use this data. So I would say that, personally, I'm quite encouraged to see the development, although, it's not as fast as we expected in some other sectors, but clearly, I think the trend is there.
Okay. How about Tanguy? How do you see that being addressed in the EU region on data?
Well, I mean, there are a number of different movements in Europe on that. If you look, I mean, one of the first movements, in fact, is the fact that the European Commission is working quite a lot on trying to streamline the data and the reporting that is expected by corporate and by institutions. And so, and the taxonomy, there is a work in Europe defining a taxonomy for sustainable finance, on which I've been part of the technical expert group. Clearly, that is pushing for more standardization on the way people are reporting about their green and then going forward their social activities. So that's the first movement. It will still take time, but the Commission is quite motivated to move on. The second movement is, I would say, the consolidation of ESG data providers. I think it's going beyond Europe, but especially it's very sensible in Europe, where we did have a number of so-called ESG rating agencies like BGO, like Ecom, like Sustainalytics that were coming out of Europe, and they have all been bought by companies, most of them from the US, like S&P, like Moody's, like ISS. And by the way, there are two movements here. Some of those companies have been bought by pure data providers like Morningstar or ISS or MSCI in the past. So that's really flow data providers. And some other ESG rating agencies have been bought by credit rating agencies like S&P and Moody's. And those are different approaches, clearly, and let's see how the market consolidates. That's the second aspect of things, I would say. And then, of course, I think when we're talking about ESG and sustainable finance, clearly there are still a number of differences in the view or in the way people are analyzing this market and seeing what are the most important things and how you balance climate or environmental and social topics. And so there is still a lot of data sets that are lacking. And that's a bit what we, and the transparency is not perfect in all dimensions, not because people are hiding things, but just because the data collection is insufficient. And so I think that's where AI and really a new tool existing for data collection can be useful. Because I think for the moment, the market providers on data, they are still relying on, I would say, old-fashioned way to gather those ESG data, which is to put pressure on the corporates so that they publish data and they report and they publish and so on. So the burden is always on the same side of the equation, meaning the corporates and the issuers, so to say. And I think it's not the way forward. The way forward is probably that there is more a bottom-up movement for data collection, with transparency organized by the citizens, certainly, and with also new ways to collect data or to recalculate data, potentially also, that should reshuffle or may reshuffle at some point ESG data collection in the future, because the simple provision of data by corporate will not be sufficient to capture all what we want to do in sustainable finance, and the fine balance between social and environment that we will have to manage in the coming years too.
Thank you, Tanguy. And you mentioned also, I think, the data collection and also potentially the use of AI. I think one of the audience members had a question from LV. If the panelists can give a concrete example of the use of AI to foster sustainable finance, and what has been the upside?
Maybe I can give one example here, and it's very recent within ADB. As you know that for every ADB's investment or finance project, we do have very clear ESG targets, and also have regular reporting from the fund recipients about those ESG targets. We have every evaluation reports, every report, periodical report from the borrower or the investee companies are disclosed at our website. So we're fully transparent to the public about what we do and what we try to achieve. But then, along with the time, we accumulated a huge database about, the ESG data and from various countries. But to a certain extent, these data are really unorganized. They are in various reports, and at the same time, each report have totally different template. We developed actually an AI algorithm for internal consumption. Basically, dig into those database and come up with lessons learned. When you try to do a similar project, you can go to the database, simply type something that, okay, we want to learn what is the lesson from, like, let's say a hydro project, and with this type of like resettlement requirement, and automatically, it will come up with some of the references. So at least the project officer can use this kind of data for his own work. It's very simple in this stage. I cannot call it kind of like a real algorithm, and we're still trying to let the algorithm to learn as much as possible in the next couple of years. But that's what I mentioned earlier. As this is the kind of first step, try to turn a bigger database for good use.
If I can just add on to Sherwin's point as well, I think it's very interesting what they're doing at ADB, where they can detect similar documents based on search parameters. But there are some startups already who are able to extract information from within documents. We do that today as well, but we do that for regulations. In the sustainable space, for example, ESG ratings, there are companies, so there are startups who are able to review the sustainability reports of firms and extract data and use that for rating purposes, right? So it facilitates the whole rating purpose. Obviously, there are other opportunities here to integrate AI. I think benchmarking as well would be very interesting. If you can somehow facilitate, data collection from within a firm, and provide some kind of real-time benchmarking, on an industry level or sector level, that would be something that's interesting as well. or even just using natural language generation to facilitate report generation. So there are a couple of small little initiatives, but maybe Somnendo, with this exposure, you probably are much more exposed to much more radical startups who are doing much more innovative things in this space.
Yes, I think talking example, there are lot of small examples coming during the crisis of how, and one example I just recollect that it was a startup which was in the fashion industry. We started building handheld bracelets to transmit data for migrant workers in dormitory and start sending data for analysis for how to respond to health crisis. So you see a lot of these examples coming up, but it goes back to the fundamental question which I raised, is the data itself. I think more we make data available, more we think about taxonomy, better it'll be the example, because almost every startup, the core AI startup today, have the basic engineering tools, formulas, algorithm to process data and make choices. I think what makes the difference is the access to data. And I think if we get that right, I don't think that we need to look for examples of where the success lies. It's just getting the data, get all these people to focus on this. And this goes beyond sustainability question. It goes to a whole set of questions you want to ask, from finance to lending and social good and other stuff. So this is where we are seeing a lot of trend. And I hope Hardis has joined the BIS.
I have.
Okay, because and I was looking at the data. Is the global hackathon running as we speak? As we speak, any of the listeners are listening, and today's the last day. And there are 3 challenges. And the reason I'm saying this because it speaks to the question by your audience. There are 3 challenges. One was reg reporting, other was AML monitoring, and the third was COVID-19 response. Guess what? Almost 30 to 40% of the applicants are on this bucket of COVID-19 response, which shows that the AI and the data and the startup community are gravitating to this space very rapidly.
Yeah. And if I can just add, maybe the reason for that is also availability of data, right? Because regulations are freely available, and you can sort of leverage off the taxonomies of regulators as well. So a lot of the
and we'll ensure as part of this program, we'll get you some test data so you can prove your software.
Thank you.
Great. So maybe we have another question from the audience from Gabriel. This shifting gears a bit, it's a topic of green financing. What are your views on renewable energy certificates and bonds as financial tools to fund green projects?
Well, I mean, energy is a highly leveraged sector. So, in fact, bonds is a very good tool to finance a renewable energy project when the projects are large enough. So we have worked on a number of projects where we have financed portfolio of renewables by bonds. In fact, the certificate market for renewable energy is a way to spur the development of renewable energy at the business level, not on the bond market. So there is no link between the certificates, which is a way to really incentivize the development of the market on the ground, and the bond market. The green bond market has been initially quite developed on renewable energy. Now it has spread in a number of different sectors, but renewable energy is still makes up a very significant component of the green bond market, probably 20 to 25% of the market, I would say right now. Clearly, there is maybe another question behind that, which is the green bond market assisting or helping to grow more renewable energy? That's a question that is always pending. I think clearly it's difficult to demonstrate one specific case where the green bond market would have done so. But I would say the market as a whole now has developed to such a level that it is not a niche market anymore. The green bond market is now a large market. In Europe, for instance, it represents almost 10% of the primary market. So that's really very significant, which means that developer, I mean, energy company or utilities, they need to think about this financing tool when they think about their financing strategy. So it has somehow an influence on the way they are conceiving their industrial approach, their strategy. So in fact, as a market, I think the green bond market and the social bond market also for COVID has demonstrated its utility, its usefulness, and probably as an indirect way and on the way companies are developing their business strategies.
So we hear from Tanguy that the green bonds or the social bonds is actually a way of for the companies, it's a strategy for them to raise their funds. But I think one of the things that is also of concern is whether these green bonds are actually just conventional bonds that are relabeled or repackaged such that these are actually bonds that would have been funded anyway. But then now they are under the guise of green bonds. So I wanted to also
greenwashing.
Yeah, greenwashing. That's right. Yeah. So whether these projects would have been otherwise not have been financed, and whether it's truly making a difference, these green bonds.
Yes,
you know, I mean, that's interesting. I would say that there is no green bond, there is no single green bond in the market where you can say, thanks to this bond or because of this bond, the project have been financed, and otherwise they would not have been financed. Because in fact, the bond, they would have existed even without the green bond label. So in fact, the additionality of the green bond market is not at this level. On the other side, we're now talking about the market that represents, as I said before, in Europe, almost 10% of the primary bond market. And in some sector, like in the utility sector or in the energy space, it's probably more like 25 to 30% of the primary market. Which means that, and so in order to represent this amount, it means that it's a full industry where you have a green bond fund, you have green bond investors, you have dedicated bankers, you have providers of data, you have, of course, specialized issuers. So that's a real ecosystem. And so it's so big, and it represents such an important pocket of money right now that for a utility, and it's true, I think, everywhere in the world, it's difficult not to issue a green bond. It's difficult to argue that you are not able to issue a green bond, because if you do that, it would mean that you are not able to demonstrate that you have green product or green project. So in fact, there is an indirect influence that is small, but at such a big scale that it has an influence. Any utility in the world, any bank in the world has to think about issuing a green bond, because their stakeholder, they will ask them the question. And in order to be able to do that, they need to look at the project that they have. And if they don't have those projects, of course, they will have to develop strategies to have green projects. So in fact, you say that there can be a bit of greenwashing, but that's in any industry, that's always the same. I think nothing is even perfect, is always perfect. There are always people playing with the boundaries. But the green bond market has a strong, I would say, and it's the same for social bond and score for COVID, as a very strong watchdog or safeguard, which is reputation. And you know, large companies, large issuers, large banks, they don't want to mess up. They don't want to screw up with their reputation. And we have seen some green bonds that were a bit beyond the boundaries, and where the corporates have suffered some strong reputation risk, and they don't do, usually they don't do it again. Either they change their approach to have a clean approach and to have and to eliminate greenwashing. People are very, I mean, reputation is a very strong asset for corporates. And so for the moment, it has covered, it has protected the green bond market. But what we see, what we have seen in Europe, and we may see probably in some other jurisdiction in Asia, and the MES has been also quite interested by this in the past, is that we are moving from a market that is contract-based and so self-organized into a market that will be regulated, and where greenwashing will be even more difficult because the market will be regulated. So I think step by step, this green bond concept is spreading all over the bond market. And the small greenwashing event that we may have seen at some moment has not been such for the moment that it has completely derailed the overall process.
Yeah. many important points there, and whether other of the panelists would like to.
So, if I can add, I think there's the other way to look at it is that, and I normally bucket into 3 buckets. There is this mobilizing of green finance, which is perhaps the easiest of all, as we can brand it and get the green. That's the skepticism there. But there are other 2M, which is difficult. If you can get it right as part of the package, it will be difficult to escape through this lenses of green. That is monitoring, measuring, and putting KPIs in place for these bonds, and then monitoring there to the life of the asset. And both the other 2, measuring and monitoring, needs a lot of technology. If you can get that piece matured or developed, I think packaging these 3 together will be an easy way to deal with the whole issue of getting genuine green bond. I think there's a question, if I can take in, I think there's a question around certification and around green bonds, right? I think MAS, if I can, is it okay? Can I? Hello?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
you can share a bit of what the MAS is doing to help out.
Yes, so we are in last Singapore FinTech Festival, we announced a Green Finance Action Plan, and there were 3 things we talked there. We talked about building a financial system resilience to environmental risk, developing the green finance market, and how do you leverage innovation and technology. And talking of guidelines, I think largely we are focused on getting the ERM guidelines, and there's a public consultation due middle of the year. I have to check my colleagues how the COVID-19 has changed this plan, but it should be there middle of the year. And we're also looking at working with the industry on setting the green standards and taxonomy. That's very critical, especially for ASEAN market where the demand will surge post-COVID-19. We're also looking at strengthening the environmental risk analysis capacity, because I can shout and I can moan on data, but there'll be always a data will be gray. So we need to create a very complex risk analysis tools to handle unstructured, structured gray data to deal with this crisis or this opportunity. And we're also looking at incentivizing green lending. As you know that we announced a $2 billion green investment program last year, under which MAS will place fund to public market investment strategy with strong green focus. We are also supporting, we have a scheme to support some of the costs associated with this certificates and reviews. We are working on a scheme to support external reviews, rating agency who access and certify green financing instrument. And that will, and I hope getting that into Singapore will create an opportunity to issue more bonds for this side of market, where some of this support for reviewers and the ratings services can be taken care. And lastly, on the technology part, again, it is a very, very early stage. We call it, we are calling Green Print. I'm not officially announced it. This is a public platform. We are thinking of how to bring the second aim and the third aim, monitor and measure all this using a platform to monitor issuance of green bonds and see how you can monitor and measure this, the commitment this instruments made as part of their disbursal in the market. So these are the areas we're working on. As my fellow panelists talked about, it is the evolving space, but COVID-19 has accentuated this space very, very fast. I think we'll get to a better space very quickly than previously envisaged.
Annabelle, may I also add a couple points on this one? Actually, you know, different from US and the European market, Asian bond market is still very young, not matured. And to a certain extent, at this moment, I think any of these bonds, any of these issuance will be helpful to develop the bond market. So to a certain extent, from ADB perspective, we do see a lot of, you know, large investment grade companies issue green bonds. As you know that, as you mentioned earlier, that you know they can issue bonds anyway, but we do see that you know it's helpful for them to you know issue green bonds for the purpose of demonstration and help to develop the markets. So from ADB perspective, you know we do encourage this kind of issuance strongly, And we do have something actually established with, ADB partnered with ASEAN plus 3 countries. There is a facility we call Credit Guarantee and Investment Facility, which is to specifically guarantee the local currency bond issued in the ASEAN plus 3 countries. So we see that there is a need to encourage the local issuers to issue local currency bond in order to get this market more matured.
Thank you, panelists. So we also have another question, many questions coming in right now. So the next question that we would like to tackle on is about energy prices plummeting, and with the low oil prices, the incentive to move to sustainable and energy is much lower. And when we talk about financing for sustainability, wouldn't that disincentivize investors in the near term? So this is a question from Gabriel. Would there be any comments about how the sustainable finance markets would be doing in light of the low oil prices?
Maybe I just give my 2 cents here, and I think the impact is still temporary, and in terms of the cost base, it's it's always relative, and oil price is low, but at the same time, when it reached to a certain stage, and when people is more passionate about the renewable energy, I would say that the sustainable finance for renewable energy or for green products, I would say definitely will continue and probably will get stronger. And as I mentioned at the beginning, and people more and more realize that there is a clear requirement for everyone to look in a long term, and how to make sure that the world becomes more sustainable.
Okay.
Yeah, I support this. I support this vision actually.
Okay. Maybe we can also move on to another question. What do you think is the significance of sustainable finance, and whether sustainable finance is sustainable, given that, for example, a lot of the work of the MAS or ADB is still being funded by non-commercial organizations. So what are the panelists thought of whether sustainable finance, whether it is a sustainable business in the longer term?
If I can add a quick response to that, I think we have to start seeing expanding the definition of sustainable finance into social finance and green finance, because when you try to mix together, it looks very distorted, and there are different way of sustaining each of them. I'm a big believer that anything promoting social responsible finance activity is sustainable. Be it healthcare, be it vaccine, be it pension systems, or so I think or covering risk through insurance, microinsurance. There's a whole suite of sustainable social projects which can be financed, and it is very much required as a lesson learned during COVID-19. And these are due to cost of technology going down dramatically, due to advent of AI, which kind of takes the burden of collection, reviewing this data through automation. It can help to structure projects and reduce the cost of running these programs, and hence make it more sustainable on the social side. On the green side, I think there's a bit of trade-off somewhere. I think that's the little complex part of how do you ensure the trade-offs are balanced, so that in a spirit of green, there are short-term, mid-term trade-offs which may go against the intent. So that's, I'm not an expert in that. I'm sure there are other panelists who can answer that question.
Okay, my view is that for those, like for the business community, for the startups, when they're wondering whether what they are doing, for example, will contribute to SDGs, they believe that it's sustainable business, whether it's business viable, whether it's commercially viable. I think this is something has been debated in the market for a long time. There are always some of things actually are not commercially viable, but we still need to do it. Then to a certain extent, this part of business, we usually call it, become like a kind of like sovereign finance, or the government need to do it. But at the same time, there are a lot of things actually you look like you're contributing a lot to the sustainability, to SDGs, but at the same time, they are commercially viable. And so to a certain extent, in terms of whether the business is commercially viable or not, I would say that it's a different question or different route from sustainability. And people really need to assess from the business perspective whether the business makes sense or not. And just for example, if you look at ADB's operations, we have two finance windows. One is we call sovereign operations. So we lend to the government, and the government basically distribute use this amount of money for their sovereign operations. Most of the time, or a lot of times, and this part of the investment cannot get commercial returns. But at the same time, the window I'm in ADB is private sector operations, or usually we call non-sovereign operations. We follow the same ADB's environmental social requirements, but at the same time, every project needs to be commercially viable, or usually we call it needs to be bankable. So people need to look at from different angles, like when they assess the business viability.
Okay.
If I may,
yes. Yeah, I would love to hear your views, especially on the AI element, or how AI can come in with that.
I just want to add on to the point that Sherwin was making. Rather than talk about AI and go off tangent, I want to put on my compliance hat and just add on to what Sherwin was saying. I think what's worth remembering is, a sustainable business is fundamentally a responsible business, right? And if you look at it from an ESG perspective, it shows the management, if they're able to demonstrate that they're aware of their key risks, that they're actively managing these key risks from these three different facets, then they become much more attractive to an investor, right? So I don't see them as always being financially asymmetric, competing in that sense, right? But yeah, back to your point. What was the point you wanted to ask me about AI and data?
Just a quick comment from you about how AI can make it more sustainable.
How AI can make it much more sustainable.
For the sustainable finance industry, that is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything new to say to this aside from the points that were covered earlier, right? So firstly, it's really about, gathering the right data. How can we help facilitate that experience first before we talk about leveraging AI to generate some meaningful insights, right?
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, as we're running out of time now,
I would like to come back to this point about the sustainability and sustainable, and the fact it's a good business proposition. I think it seems to me that we are beyond this point right now. I think that maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago, when we were discussing sustainable finance with various stakeholders, there was a bit this discussion, or is it a good business for the company, for the bank, so on. I think now, sustainable finance, either climate change or key social topics, they are core business for all the clients on the investor side and on the corporate side. So the ability that we have to embed that into our decision-making process, into an investment banking decision, is an important business driver for us. And I think there is no question behind that. I think this is, and if we make a focus on Singapore specifically, there is clearly a fantastic opportunity for Singapore. as there are in the other region in the world. But clearly there is a fantastic opportunity in Singapore. There is a lot of innovation capacity on AI and on IT in Singapore, clearly, and a lot of capacity there. And in fact, the fact that, for instance, as I mentioned before, all the data provision right now has been bought by a US firm creates opportunity to create new champions. And we don't have a regional champion for ESG data provision in Asia. I mean, this could come out of Singapore, that's clear. And I also want to react to the comment made earlier, the fact that we need to develop local market. I think it is also, I mean, sustainable finance is also a fantastic way to either attract investor on local project, as we have seen, for instance, with the green bond with Vena, which we have arranged, which was, I think, the first corporate green bond out of Singapore, which was in dollars. So it was a good way to attract dollar investors and foreign investors to a Singapore issuer. But there is also the other way around, where if you develop the local market, it's good for your local issuer, but it's also good for your local investors, because if there is a dynamic local market, it means like foreign issuer will also come to your local market, and we have seen that in a number of ways. So there are a number of opportunities to seize in this market.
Thank you, Tongyi, for wrapping up the topic so nicely with a very good summary, and then even a lot of shout outs to MAS and Singapore.
So the startup question, can I quickly, 1 second?
Okay,
just in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to put 100 challenge statement on this space, 100, 100, and there's a $1 million plus worth of prizes waiting if you can solve them as before Singapore FinTech Festival. So we are, this time the Global Accelerator is dedicated to solving this problem. So 100 problem statement will be out there. Anybody in this audience want to solve it, join that party.
Amazing for the audience, $1 million worth of prizes. So we're out of time. I would like to thank the panelists so much for all your time, energy, and insights. And last but not least, for the audience for participating and engaging in conversation. So the panel is over, but the work for sustainable finance and AI is not over. So one way to make an impact is to join the MAS 100 challenge statements, as Swapnandu has shared with us. But thank you very much, everyone, for being part of this conversation, and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you.
Tuan, back over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much all for this very insightful and interactive discussion. Thank you, Sherwin, Swapnandu, Tongyi, and Arnesh for your availability today, and Adamel for moderating this great panel. Thanks to all our participants to have attended this webinar and for all the questions, and we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Before we end the session, I would like to invite you all to save the date of the 9th of July for our next webinar on smart home and smart office that we will do in partnership with SGInnovate, with again great speakers around the table. Smart home and smart office is a topic that reveals today's situation and trends, as we all know, but is also a topic which fully fits again our sustainable journey at the French Chamber, and for a more sustainable journey, as we could hear all of you mentioning it during this webinar. And on behalf of the French Chamber and SGInnovate, I would like to thank you all again, and see you soon.
I know that I think Adesh and Swapnandu might have left the event, but Sherwin and Tongyi, could we just have a quick wave from you, and we could just take a quick shout out here. Just hold on for one moment, yeah. All right, oh, very good. Just wave again for me, please. All right, oh, very good. We'll send it to you after this as well.
Thank you.
You have a good day ahead. Bye, Sherwin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.